President Trump taking aim at the district this week. The president spoke to reporters on Air Force One that he says that federal government should take over D.C. Trump says that he gets along with D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, but also says that local officials are not doing the job.
I think that we should govern District of Columbia. It's so important, the D.C. situation. I think that we should run it strong, run it with law and order, make it absolutely flawlessly beautiful, and I think we should take over Washington, D.C., make it safe. People are getting killed, people are being hurt. You have a great police department there, but somehow they're not utilized properly. We should govern D.C.
And joining us on Capitol Review is Dr. Robinson Woodward-Burns. He's an associate professor and director of graduate studies for the Department of Political Science at Howard University. Professor, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Professor, those comments that the president made earlier in the week, what is the process for the federal government to take over the District of Columbia? What has to happen? Is it just simply a congressional vote and that's it?
That's a great question. So there are two ways we could see a federal takeover of the District of Columbia. One is for Congress to take over D.C. Under the U.S. Constitution, under the Enclave Clause, Congress has exclusive power over the District of Columbia. And from the founding of D.C. in 1790 all the way up to 1973, Congress was responsible for governing D.C. It did this through a combination of congressional committees and special commissions. In 1973, Congress passed the Home Rule Act, and that gave D.C. residents this fundamental right, the right to vote for their own city or district council and a mayor. And that council and mayor has been responsible for governing the District of Columbia for the last half century. Now, Congress can still oversee laws passed by the district and oversees the district's budget, but Congress has largely been hands-off because running a major city, one with 750,000 people, is pretty difficult. Now, Congress does have the ability to repeal the Home Rule Act. It can do it by simple majority vote in either chamber. That bill would then have to be signed by President Trump to go into law. It'd be pretty difficult for Congress then to actually run the district, and it's not clear whether Congress would reinstitute these defunct committees that used to run the District of Columbia or to bring back a commission system. Another option would be just to reinstitute the Financial Control Board, which was put into place in 1995, which gives D.C. Congress much more hands-on authority over D.C.'s budget. The second option is for the executive to try to, the president to try to administer the District of Columbia. President Trump has authority over the D.C. National Guard, which he used or more accurately refused to use on January 6th when he delayed deployment of the National Guard to the United States Capitol. When Trump protesters stormed the Capitol during that insurrection. Donald Trump also can take over D.C.'s police force, the Metropolitan Police Department, if he wanted to.
Well, Professor, Mayor Muriel Bowser spoke Thursday after the president made those comments. Listen to what she had to say.
We will brief the president, give him the facts, work with him cooperatively on our shared priorities and areas where he has concerns. So I've made that offer once again to the White House.
Your reaction to Mayor Bowser's comments?
Bowser is in a particularly tough place. Unlike mayors of cities and states who can rely on the protection of their governor or of the U.S. Constitution, which actually does give powers to state governments and mayoral or municipal governments, D.C. doesn't have that protection. Under the U.S. Constitution, D.C. is subject entirely to the authority of Congress and, to some degree, to the United States president, which Congress has deferred some authority to. And so Mayor Bowser is in a much tougher position than, say, a mayor or a governor like Kathy Hochul of New York or the governor of California, who could more openly defy the U.S. president. That's not really an option for Mayor Bowser.
And what would this mean for the takeover? Would we still have a council? Would we still have a mayor?
If Congress repeals the Home Rule Act, then there would be no congressional statutory grounding for the position of the mayor of the District of Columbia or the council of the District of Columbia. If you get rid of the Home Rule Act, those positions disappear, and so does the right of self-government for those 750,000 district residents.
And Professor, quickly, how likely do you think this will happen? Is it we just have to wait and see, or it seems like President Trump has tried to keep all of his promises. Everything that he said he wanted to do, he's doing.
That's a really good question. So there are some things that President Trump has tried to do, like an executive order repealing birthright citizenship, which are unconstitutional, which are forbidden under the U.S. Constitution. And we can expect courts to strike those down. Other things Congress or the president has much more authority to do, including the authority to regulate or govern the District of Columbia. Whether Congress actually really wants to do this is a separate question. Running an entire city, again, is pretty difficult. And so it's maybe a little less likely that Congress would actually go through the steps of repealing the Home Rule Act. Remember that Republican majorities in Congress are pretty slim, and you would need to get the entire party in both chambers on board to get that bill to pass. It's probably more likely that Donald Trump would try to take control of the D.C. National Guard or the Metropolitan Police Department for a short period in order to say that he had been tough on crime within the District of Columbia. And then once that's done, he would probably move on to some other goal.
Professor Robinson Woodward-Burns, thank you so very much for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me.